It turns out that many of the things that we are commonly told to do to learn a new language actually actively interfere with our progress and may prevent our success. So these are things we don't want to do. We want a language learning program, in this case, learning English, that's effective. We want to spend our time wisely. So I have 6 things that you should look for in your habits to make sure you're spending your time wisely and effectively. I am Joseph. This is Input English. Let's get started with number 1. Don't translate. I have a separate video entitled Don't Translate. This is a big deal. But let's realize that when someone starts out with a brand new language, starting from essentially zero, they have to translate in order to get a grip on the language. It's virtually impossible to start with a new language and do no translation. But we want to get away from that as soon as possible. We want to learn words, phrases, the sound of the language without translating it through our native language. It's very simple. Why? Number 1, English is not your language with a bunch of different words. They're different structures, and translating them, particularly word for word, simply will not help you. It will give you a bizarre look at the English language. The next point is you don't have enough time to translate and understand the language that's coming toward you. As you listen to English, if you're translating it through your language, you won't be able to keep up. People talk too fast for that to work. And then when you start speaking, you won't be able to keep up with the conversation because by translating it through another language, you won't be able to think of the words quickly enough to keep up. Also, if you're translating through another language, you may employ grammar that is not typical of the English language, and people may have trouble understanding you. So as soon as you can, let's get away from translation, because if you're doing a lot of translation, it's harming your program long term. Number 2, do not go to classes. Now, as you listen to this list of recommendations, bear in mind, I am not making rules. You can do anything you want. I'm just telling you that going to class is probably not in your best interest. Why? Well, classes are expensive. They take a lot of time. They don't give you a lot of input, and the input they give you may be very bad input. If you've ever been to a language class, you may recall that the students are called upon to speak. And when they speak, their pronunciation and grammar are quite poor because they are students. But this poorly spoken language becomes input for you. Now you have the problem of dealing with input that is poor quality input. You deserve better than input that's poorly spoken. Your time is much better spent getting high quality, well-pronounced input from other sources. Number 3, do not take tests. Well, let me rephrase that. Do not willingly take tests. If someone forces you to take a test to qualify for a scholarship, to get into a school, or to get a job, and you're forced to take the test, then take the test. You have to do it. But if it's not something like that, don't willingly submit yourself to test taking. There's no benefit for doing that, and there's a lot of downside. Taking tests takes time, and you could better spend that time getting input. And taking tests also gives you fairly negative messaging about your progress. Most commonly, when someone takes a test and they get their score back, it's fairly bad news. They were hoping to score higher than that test specified. In language learning, we need a sense of joy and enthusiasm, and taking tests can really quash that joy and enthusiasm that we need. Number 4, do not memorize. We now know a lot about the way the human brain works. So when we learn a new word or a new phrase, it is put into memory. And the strength of that memory is related to how many different connections you can establish between the new thing you're learning and the things that you already have in memory. So if you learn something by comprehensible input and you hear it several times and you learn various ways to use that word, various connections with things in your experience, then the storage strength of that learned material will be quite strong. And that means when you try to use that new word speaking, it'll be relatively easier to retrieve. You want good storage strength. Instead, if you only have a translated, memorized connection where the new word is connected with one thing in your language and not a lot of connections, then the storage strength is very weak and it will be very difficult for you to remember and use that word. Now, why do we talk about memorization? Because all of us were taught in school to memorize. Memorization for language learning has been completely discredited. It is useful to improve performance on tests, but we're not trying to perform well on tests. We're trying to perform well in life and learn a new language. So do not memorize. It's a waste of your valuable time. Number 5, do not study grammar. We were all taught to study grammar. We have to understand that the language learning industry now is estimated to be worth about $60 billion a year and growing. In the next half decade, the amount of money involved in language learning will probably double. A lot of language learning techniques are related to the study of the structure of the language, not the acquisition of the language. Knowing a bunch of grammar rules will make you different than native speakers, because most native speakers do not refer to grammar rules when they construct their sentences and express their thoughts. They speak naturally based on the language they acquired as a child. If you ask a native speaker what the grammar rule is for something he or she just said, it is very likely that they will not be able to state the rule that they were following. If you are thinking about grammar rules and you're trying to listen, participate, and speak with someone in the new language, you will fail because your brain can't process grammar rules and the language model at the same time. Studying grammar sets you up for failure and it wastes your valuable time. Now, we do want to learn the grammar, but we want to acquire it with input. We don't want to learn the rules explicitly. It's a waste of your valuable time. And number 6, don't be hard on yourself. Your brain is the instrument that is acquiring this new language. So your brain needs to be respected and treated well. If you are overly critical of your own performance, you will lose that sense of joy that makes learning a new language so effective. Instead of being overly critical of yourself, accept what is happening, put an emphasis on a sense of joy and adventure. Learning a language is as much about the journey as it is the destination. So those are the 6 things that we want to get rid of. If you see those in your day-to-day habits for trying to learn English, if you can get rid of those, you can improve your efficiency and enjoyment of learning English. Now, since I have recommended you get rid of all of that, that may free up some time for you in your language learning program to do some things that are very productive. So it's not an accident that our next video will cover 6 things that you want to make sure are included in your language learning program to ensure success. So if you liked this video and you want more on this topic, be sure to click this video next. See you soon.